Hi, my name is Jonathan. I am one of the pastors here at Heights, and we're so glad that you found us online. You know, at Heights, it is our desire to love and lead all people to a new life with Christ. And one of the ways that we strive to do that is by posting weekly content at all of the places, on Facebook and on YouTube, on Instagram. We even have our own website where we're constantly posting things as well. If you're checking us out for the first time, you can go to heightschurch.org/connect and let us know that you found us. And once again, we're so glad that you're here.
All right, I'm going to invite you this morning, if you have a Bible with you, to open to the book of Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 6, we are finishing our series this morning, Why Am I Here? And we're going to finish that in Isaiah 6, looking at the purpose of being sent, looking at that purpose of how God sends us out every day in our lives. If I was to give you a task to complete, and I want you to think of this answer just quietly and silently in your mind, a task to complete in which I said, I'm going to send you on a task, but before I send you and before you say yes or no to, I need you to understand a few things about what I'm sending you to do. Number one, it's going to be very hard. You have no promise of earthly success. You may have to move from your city in which you live, the state in which you live, or the country in which you live. This task I'm about to send you out to do, it may cause you to make less money. You may have to move into a smaller house. So it's going to be incredibly hard. No promise of success. You might have to move. You might have to live in a smaller house, and you might have to make less money than you make today. Now, in your mind, what are you thinking? All right, a lot of you may say no. You may say, I don't know. I need more help to understand what that task is. I want you to see today a prophet by the name of Isaiah. That God says, Isaiah, I'm about to send you out for this purpose. And Isaiah is going to get to a point in his life where he says, yes, Lord, send me. And I want to pray that this morning that would be my heart and your heart, no matter where God sends us, the conditions we have put on that call, that we say, yes, we are going to be sent for the purpose you are sending us out for in order to share the gospel and make disciples of all people. So how do we get from saying, no, that sounds really hard and I don't want to do it, to saying, yes, Lord, send me? Well, I think you've got to learn some lessons that Isaiah learned that I need to continue to learn in my life. And let's look at those lessons Isaiah learned that moved him to a point of being able to say, yes, Lord, send me. Well, first, Isaiah learned the lesson that God is holy. That God is holy. When you pick up into chapter 6, we pick up in verse 1. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now the setting is verse 1. It's in the year that King Uzziah has died. Uzziah was a good king for the people of Judah. Judah was the southern kingdom of Israel at the time. Uzziah was a good king. He had been in power for 52 years. They had prosperity. There was economic development. There was peace among the enemies. And there was no real warfare. Isaiah overall was a good king. So this is a big blow. This is a national tragedy that Uzziah has died. And so here is Isaiah the prophet going to where Isaiah knows to go in the moment of tragedy. He's going to the temple. He's going in to pray. And now he's given this heavenly vision of God. And notice what he saw first. He saw that God was sitting on his throne, high and lifted up. I mean, I think it's interesting. You can compare this. Uzziah's off his throne. God's still on his throne. One king has died, one king is alive. One king was mortal, another king is immortal. And you don't see God in heaven pacing around. You don't see him panicking. You don't see him worried. And what kind of comfort can that bring to you today? It's this, that God's above all our problems, that God's fully in control. You know, when we used to sing it maybe in Sunday school growing up, if you grew up in church, or you've heard it, he's got the whole world what? In his hands, right? I mean, it's true. He's got the whole world in his hands. He is in full control of everything. But notice also what Isaiah saw. He saw these seraphim around the throne. Seraphim, the Hebrew word means burning ones. These are angelic creatures. Look in verse 2 of what these seraphim are doing. With each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. They're saying that we literally can't look into the glory of God. With 2, he covered his feet. It's a picture of submission to God. With 2, he flew. They're serving the Lord. But notice the song in which they're singing, the statement in which they're making, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. You know, it's interesting in the Hebrew that this is the only time you see one of the attributes of God repeated. Holy, holy, holy. You never read in the Bible that God is love, 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 or God is graceful, graceful, graceful. See, it's actually a grammatical way in the Hebrew to point out emphasis in what they were saying. And you and I, we do this all the time. When you want to kind of put an emphasis to something that you are writing. Years ago, you wrote letters, and you might have put an exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Or in a letter that you were writing, you would underline a word 3 times. You know, now in text messages, for those of you that still don't know, if you text in all caps, you are yelling at the other person, okay? So if you don't know that, that's what that means, all right? So if you're just texting someone all the time in all caps, that person is reading that with a tone of voice of you yelling at them, all right? I had to teach my dad this some years ago, that every time I would text him, Dad, how are you doing? He would text back, okay, and so is your mother. We love you, you know, and every response, it was all caps. Finally, one day I called him. I was like, you got to quit yelling at me. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, that's what all caps means, right? And so now I've just kind of changed the way some of you are going to text now, right? All right, so we do this in text messages. We'll kind of put an emoji beside something, a laughing face or an angry face or whatever. And so we emphasize words that we're communicating. And this is the Hebrew, that they're emphasizing that God is holy, because understand the holiness of God is the chief attribute of God. Right? So the holiness of God is his chief attribute. It's his most important attribute. So out of his holiness comes his perfect love. Out of his holiness comes his perfect care. Out of his holiness comes his perfect forgiveness. Out of his holiness comes his perfect justice. Because he is holy, he can love us perfectly, take care of us perfectly, forgive us perfectly, and execute perfect justice in our world. Now, if I ask you, and I'm not going to ask you to respond out loud, if God is holy, many of you are going to give me the Sunday school answer, and you're going to say yes. And you might believe it, but there's times we have crisis of belief on the holiness of God, do we not? Have you ever caught yourself saying this, or maybe thinking this? God, do you really love me? Because if you love me, my spouse wouldn't have died. God, are you really kind? Because if you are really kind and good, my kid wouldn't have gotten sick. Lord, are you really a providing God? Because if you really were a providing God, I'd have a job right now. Have you ever thought or said maybe out loud, Lord, are you really a God of justice? Because if you're really a perfect God of justice, there'd be no evil in our world. See, there's times we'll say, yes, God's a holy God, but then when suffering is introduced, we have this crisis of faith. But what I want you to see is Isaiah learned this lesson, that when there was a crisis of suffering and faith, that Isaiah was still willing to say, yes, God, I'll go wherever you send me for that purpose, because I understand you're a holy God. But I want you to see the second lesson he learned that you and I need to learn. In order to say yes to God for the purpose of wherever God's sending us to go, that we need to understand that God's a cleansing God. He's a purifying God. And He's a purifying God. And so when we pick up in verse 4, we read that Isaiah has now seen the Lord in His holiness. The foundations of the threshold of the temple shook at the voice of Him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. Verse 5 says, Isaiah said, "Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King of hosts." Man, I love that verse. Isaiah gets this vision of God's holiness. And Isaiah, for the first time in probably a long time, saw God for who He really was, and Isaiah saw himself for who he really was. See, verse 5 is an interesting verse because Isaiah says, "Woe is me, for I'm lost." Or your translation may say, "Woe is me, for I'm undone." Literally, it means I'm coming apart at the seams. Isaiah is saying, compared to God, I am lost, I'm undone, my life is literally falling apart because I realize this is a holy God and I'm not holy. And I love the way he starts that out. Do you notice it? Woe is me. You know the job of an Old Testament prophet? It was to go around and pronounce judgment on others. There's some of you right there that have been like, I would have loved to do that. Man, you. Some of you just do it naturally without even God calling you to the ministry or sending you out. That's just who you are. But that was the job of the Old Testament prophet. Go around and pronounce judgment. If you read Isaiah chapters 1 through 5, that's what he's getting at. Chapter 5 is all about Isaiah saying, woe is you, woe is you, woe is you, woe is you. He's saying judgment to you, judgment to you, judgment to you. And then notice what he said in verse 5? Judgment to me. Wow, I'm coming apart at the seams. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. You know, I don't know about you. There's a lot of game shows I used to watch growing up and still watch a few today. And maybe some of these game shows you watched or connect with. I was just thinking of all the kind of popular game shows. You know, there was the dating game, $10,000 pyramid. You know, as a kid, watching The Price is Right. You know, remember when you got to be home from school sick? What'd you do? You watched The Price is Right with Bob Barker, right? Remember those days? Oh, Bob Barker, man, come on down. You got to spin the big wheel, and the showcase at the end. The Price is Right. You think of Family Feud, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Deal or No Deal, like all these game shows. You know, millions of Americans every day play a game. And here's the game they play. How do I get right with God? That's a game that millions and millions of Americans are playing right now today. How do I get right with God? And here's how the game is played. So many of them are playing, how do I get right with God? And here's what they do. They say, as long as I stay ahead of the other guy, I'll win in the end with God. Meaning this, as long as I'm morally better than my neighbor, at the end of my life, I'll be okay with God. As long as I'm morally better than the guy I see on TV that just got sentenced to prison, I'll be okay with God. As long as I'm morally better than the other guy, I'll be okay with God. And listen, when you play that game, you'll freely admit, yeah, I'm a sinner. I'm not perfect. I'm not like God, but thank God I'm not like that other person. But let me tell you this. If you're playing that game, how do I get right with God? I'll just morally be better than the other guy. That's a dangerous game you're going to play, and you're going to lose in the end. And the consequence of losing that is hell for all of eternity. Because there's only one way to get right with God. And Isaiah understood it, and I pray you understand it. The only way to get right with God is for God to purify you, for God to cleanse you. And I want you to notice what Isaiah does. He makes this declaration, woe is me, I'm lost, I'm a man of unclean lips. Man, I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. I've seen the King, I understand God's holy. I understand compared to God, I'm not holy. And then notice what happens after that confession, verses 6 and 7. God sends a seraphim who takes tongs and he picks up a live coal from the altar. He places it on Isaiah's lips and he says, your sin is atoned for. Your sin is taken away. It is purged. What a picture of what Jesus Christ does on the cross for you and I. That Jesus takes our sin upon himself and he takes it away from us and he atones for it. He pays the penalty for our sin. He purges that sin out of our lives. But listen, the only way that happens is if you come clean with God. See, the good news of the gospel is this, that when you come clean with God, God makes you clean. When you come clean, he makes you clean. And so for some of you right now, you're hiding something in the dark. You're hiding it from your spouse. You're hiding it from your friend. You're hiding it from a teacher. You're hiding it from whomever. We're not hard to trick, but you're not going to trick him. You won't trick God. But the good news is this: when you take what's in the dark in your life and you bring it into the light, and you say, Lord, I name this as a sin and I need to be forgiven of this and cleansed from this, God cleanses you. He forgives you. He doesn't do that work in the dark. He does it in the light. And so this morning, bring whatever you're hiding to him and say, Lord, I need this forgiven. I need to be cleansed from this. And the good news of the Bible is this: he is faithful and just to cleanse us from all of our sin and all of our unrighteousness. And so Isaiah learned, in order to say, God, here I am, send me. This God that's going to send me, he's holy, and he's a purifying God. He's a cleansing God. He's going to get me ready to go. But I want you to notice the third thing, third lesson that he learned. He learned that God is a sending God. That God doesn't just save us to sit, that God sends us every day where he wants us to be. Verse 8. And I'm going to read on down to verse 13. And I heard the voice, Isaiah said, of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Then I said, Isaiah said, here I am, send me. Now, if you have ever heard a pastor preach this, they usually stop right at verse 8. And you know why? It's a good spot to stop, quite honestly. Because things get harder from here. And this is where we don't like to talk about the hard stuff at times. Here I am, send me. Notice, no conditions. Isaiah's just, hey, I'm willing. He's not putting conditions on this. He's not saying, God, I'll go if it's easy. God, I'll go if I got time. God, I'll go if it won't cost me anything. God, I'll go if it's not hard. No, he's just saying, here I am, send me. And God says, okay, verse 9, go and say to this people, keep on hearing but do not understand. Keep on seeing but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, their ears heavy, blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Do you notice the ministry that God just gave Isaiah? He said, Isaiah, you're going to go out to preach, and nobody's going to listen. Isaiah, you're going to go out and preach, and your words that you're going to preach, the words I give you, are actually going to make the people's hearts harder toward me, not softer toward me. And I love verse 11. What's the question? How long, O Lord? Isn't that a great question? How long? Okay, God, you're sending me to that. How long do you want me to do that? Like a day? 4-week sermon series? Yeah. Like how long? It's a legitimate question. A year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? How long? How long do you want me to do that? Verse 11, God says, until cities laid waste, without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away. Forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. Verse 13, and though a tenth remain in it, it'll be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. God says, listen, Isaiah, you're going to do this ministry until I'm done judging the people. Because I've been telling them judgment's coming. And here comes judgment. Now, verses 8 through 13 are kind of incredibly hard to understand. There's a lot of tension in these verses. There's a lot of tension because, number one, throughout the rest of the book of Isaiah, God at times calls Isaiah to call the people back to him. Right? So you're going to see invitations if you kept reading through the book where he's like, okay, go out and tell them to come back to me. But here, what does it say? You're going to go preach and they're not going to listen. So we got to wrestle with that tension of going, well, wait a minute, God, hang on, what's going on? But also notice this, in the New Testament, this passage is quoted 4 times. It's often quoted by Jesus, and Jesus says, this is the reason I often teach in parables. Listen to Matthew 13, 10 through 15. The disciples came and said to Jesus, why do you speak to them in parables? And Jesus answered to them, and he's saying, why do you speak to them in parables? Meaning the religious leaders, why do you speak to them in parables? Jesus answered, and he says, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even when he has been taken, it will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. You will indeed hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. For the people's heart has grown dull. Their ears, they can barely hear. Their eyes they've closed, lest they have seen with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. So understand what's happening in Isaiah and in the ministry of Jesus and in the ministry we have in preaching the gospel. That there are times as you share the gospel with people, that it will actually have the effect of hardening their hearts more. But there are also times as you share the gospel, it will have the effect of softening hearts and helping people turn to the Lord. Notice what happened in Isaiah. There are some that are just going to harden their hearts. But the good news is verse 13. God says there's still a remnant that believes. There's still people who will believe. And so as you and I are people who are sent to share the gospel and make the disciples, here's how we resolve the tension. We go and we obey the Lord, we share the gospel, we make disciples, and we leave the results up to God. The results are never what we're to do. The results is the obedience. The result is in sharing. The result is obeying the call to go share and then let God be God, and he sorts out the rest. And so he's saying, Isaiah, just go, share. I know who's going to be left. I know the 10th. I know who's the ones that are going to be ones that harden their heart. But let me also say this. For those of you today that you're not yet a believer in Jesus Christ, understand, every time you say no to the Lord, you harden your heart a little more. And every time you harden a little more and a little more and a little more, the harder it is to say yes. So the longer you fight against God on whatever that call is in your life, the harder you make your ears dull to him, the longer you harden your heart to him, the harder it is one day to say yes. So stop saying no and say yes today. Say yes to Jesus Christ. Because as the Lord calls, now is the day to say yes. Today is that day of salvation. But the more and the longer you say no, then the harder it is to say yes. And that's God's point to Isaiah. That was Jesus' point to the religious leaders. These are people who already had hardened hearts toward him. And so this morning, say yes to Christ. This morning, I'm going to encourage you to think about where God is sending you every day. Your purpose is to be a witness to Christ to where he sends you. Your purpose to where God sends you in everyday life is to answer the call to say, I'm going to share the gospel and make disciples. So maybe where he is sending you is school. For our students, it's school. Who are those folks in your classrooms that you can say, I'm going to share the gospel with my friend and make a disciple of Jesus? For many of you, it's a workplace. How in the workplace can I share the gospel and I can make a disciple of Jesus? For many of you, it's in your home, right? It's in your home as a parent. God has blessed you with little ones. And you can say, all right here in my home is where I can share the gospel and make disciples of Jesus. For those of you, where we live, in our neighborhoods, where you do hobbies, right? The Alvin Senior Center, wherever you go and you do your hobby, out on the golf course, wherever it is, where is God sending you every day? Where you can say, here I am, God, send me. And I'm going to obey that call no matter the cost, no matter how hard it's going to be, because it's a holy God that's sending me. It's a God that's cleansed me and purified me. So it's a God now that's saying, here's where I want you to go. All right, Lord, I'm going to go do that right where you put me every day in my life for the purpose of sharing the gospel and making a disciple. I want you today to think about that one person where you're going to be around tomorrow, whether it's school, work, in your home, in your neighborhood, wherever you're going to go do a hobby. Who's that one person you can start saying, Lord, who's that person you're sending me to share the gospel and make a disciple? And finally, this morning, I'm going to call you. Don't harden your heart any longer. Today, let today be that day of salvation for you, to come to the Lord, to bring your sin out of darkness and find healing and forgiveness and cleansing in the light of Jesus Christ. So let's bow in prayer. The Bible calls us just to pray in our own words, in our own way. And so maybe you've never really prayed, or you say, I'm ready to place my faith in Christ, but I don't know what to say. Then I'm just going to pray a simple prayer that you can follow along with me right where you are. And it's God that knows your heart. And so you can simply just bow in prayer and say, Dear God, today I'm ready to place my faith and trust in Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Thank you for saving me. Amen. If you've prayed that prayer today, first and foremost, we are proud of you. We're excited that you're taking that step of faith, and we'd love to connect with you and follow up with you and just cheer you on in your journey now with Christ. And so you can connect with us by going to heightschurch.org/connect. Click the decision tab. That's going to bring up a form for you to fill out. That's going to come right to me, and we're going to be in touch with you to see how we can come alongside of you and encourage you. If you're in our area, we'd love to connect with you in person on a Sunday morning. Our life groups are at 9 a.m. and our worship service starts at 10:30 a.m. So we hope to see you soon, and we hope you have a great week. God bless.